Hello everyone, welcome to On Motorsports with me, your host Tom Sthaler. We share stories of racing and automotive history. In late 1968, when I was a mere infant, my dad went to work at Carl A. Haas Auto Imports in Highland Park, Illinois as his public relations manager. For the next 35 years, Haas would be Dad's employer, then client, then partner. The car I got to try on for size in this story was one of two team cars competing in the iconic Johnson's Wax Can-Am series at the moment that Dad joined Haas. The other team car at that time, a Lola T-160B, was piloted by Chuck Parsons. Parsons and his wife Sherry developed a very close friendship with my parents and were around the house fairly frequently. Chuck Parsons was my earliest hero in a sport that would remain my lifelong passion. Nearly 50 years later, I would have the rare privilege to drive one of the 1968 Haas Can-Am cars, thanks to friends Lola T-160 and Jonathan Seeger. Before we move into the story, if you like what you see, subscribe and hit the like button. Ring the bell too so we can let you know when new stories appear. We post about once a week. The following story is from when I was an active editor-at-large for Turnology, a power auto media outlet. As a noted Type A personality, I tend to thrive on anxiety. My doctor has checked my blood pressure and it seems to be normal and healthy, despite the obvious warning signs. Anxious moments and anxious anticipation power my senses to overload, which for me sometimes registers as normal. This is definitely part of the reason I thoroughly enjoy driving race cars. The prospect of driving the ex-Carl Haas Racing Skip Scott-driven 1968 Lola T-160 Can-Am car, a tender offer from car owner Lola T-160 at Gideon Group Toluca Lake Motorsports, definitely put me on that edge. For one, while I have had club racing wheel time, Can-Am car resided well up the learning curve for me, but most importantly, this particular car holds an extra special connection. So in essence, getting to drive such an iconic car was an emotional and physical perfect storm. One of the United States' most successful race teams, whether it be Can-Am, Formula 5000, the new single-seat Can-Ams, Formula Super V, and IndyCar kart, was the Carl A. Haas team from Highland Park, then Lincolnshire, Illinois. With a literal who's who of some of the greatest contemporary drivers of all time and unmatched preparation, they rank nearly alone with Team Penske and Ganassi, and were always at the front of the grid. Like Penske, Haas even had a foray into Formula One, no relation to the Gene Haas team you see today, but the Beatrice Lola team from the mid-1980s. Consider the names: Mario and Michael Andretti, Jackie Stewart, Jackie Ickx, Alan Jones, Brian Redman, Maston Gregory, Peter Revson, Nigel Mansell, Patrick Tambay, David Hobbs, Chuck Parsons, Skip Scott, Sebastian Bourdais, Cristiano D'Amata, Christian Fittipaldi. It was hard to list them in any type of order. Who goes first? The original Canadian-American Challenge Cup Series, beginning in 1966 and running through 1974, has been widely acclaimed as the greatest sports car series of all time. The rules were simple: a two-seat sports car chassis with closed fenders, after which the rules were essentially, there are no rules. The Can-Am was to sports cars what the Indianapolis 500 used to be to open-wheel racing, a platform of innovation and invention. The cars were ungodly fast, putting down nearly 1,000 horsepower, and in some cases more, from big block power plants and cars weighing less than 2,000 pounds, including the driver. Carl Haas was the North American importer of Lola race cars and Hewland gearbox since 1960. His business proceeds went to racing from the time he sold gearbox parts from his parents' garage in the 1950s. While racing has classically been a losing proposition in business for most, Haas was incredibly successful in all his racing pursuits, but then consider many of his sporting competitors bought all their cars and parts directly from him. Haas passed away in July of 2016 after a prolonged battle with Alzheimer's. Uncle Carl, as we affectionately called him in the Sthaler household as I grew up, never forgot to send a personalized Christmas card each year and always had time for me, whether at a racetrack or interviewing him for my high school business class project. My father, T. Richard Dick Sthaler, on the other hand, had Haas business to contend. Both he and Haas were poster children for the Type A personality. But despite the headbutting for 35 years, they would work together on race teams, tracks like Road America, the Milwaukee Mile, and the inaugural Houston Grand Prix, and those 2 years in Formula One. I saw my first race, albeit in a stroller, at 8 months of age in 1968, and interestingly, Skip and Chuck Parsons won the Road America 500, piloting a Lola T-160 for Haas. The T-160 was the predecessor to the T-160, which was now in my hands. Formula and sports racing cars designed by Eric Broadley in Milton Keynes, UK, named for his wife Lola in a U.S. distribution partnership with Haas, were amongst the most popular race cars of all time. The T-160 was a world-beating design, so much so that Ford tapped the Englishman to design bodywork for the first GT40s in world endurance racing. Can-Am itself began as a Group 7 sports racer series and was considered a Formula Libre template. Formula Libre rules are very loose, allowing purpose-built race cars of different types and ages to compete. With races in Canada, hence CAN, and in the United States of America, hence AM, and sponsorship from Johnson's Wax, it attracted manufacturers and drivers from all over the world, mainly for its incredibly rich purses. The Can-Am was governed by rules under the FIA Group 7 category with unrestricted engine size and allowed turbocharging and supercharging. The car in my hands participated in 4 races during the 1968 Can-Am season. Just thinking about the cars and stars that this Lola was exposed to back in the day made my mind wander, albeit before I allowed the car to move out of the pit lane. With me tightly strapped in, the Toluca Lake Historics crew, Craig, Noah, and Herbert, pushed the Lola from the garage at Willow Springs International Raceway. I thought of Chuck and Sherry, Carl, and so many of my formative and adult years at Elkhart Lake. My moment had arrived.
Actually, that's fine. Obviously, it's a tight fit. We're going to strap them in as tight as possible. It's an open cockpit car. That being said, as much support, as much tenacity to the driver, to the body of the car is, you can't ever have enough. 10 miles of tightness.
You know what I have to say about this, Jonathan?
What do you have to say, Tommy?
Woohoo!
Yeah, this is, you know, folks at home, this is the shit right here.
Lola T-160 Chassis 5 was delivered to Carl Haas Automobile Imports in August of 1968. It was painted orange with a white nose and a number 26 to differentiate the two team cars. Parsons' car was solid orange, number 10. The Simonized 1+1 special livery was then applied for the sponsor, which incidentally was not a wax product like many of the Simonized offerings, but an oil additive. The car ran 4 of 1968's 6 Can-Am events with Skip Scott at the wheel, finishing an impressive 7th at Laguna Seca and 8th in Edmonton. The other 2 races at Bridgehampton and Riverside resulted in DNFs, and Scott, who is reputedly a pay-to-play driver, was released from his contract. The T-160/5 was then sold to Doug Shearson Racing. Shearson, who as a team owner would win the 1990 Indy 500 with driver Arie Luyendyk, had negotiated Marathon Oil sponsorship for the 1969 season and had brought the Haas-prepared car for the team. Sadly, during a preseason test at Grattan, Michigan, the car was crashed heavily in the hands of Shearson himself. The car left the track at a high rate of speed, careening into a concrete block brick wall not far off the racing service. Shaken up but unhurt in what could have easily been a fatal accident, Shearson brought the wreck back to his shop in Adrian, Michigan, and purchased the T-160/9 chassis from Haas. This went on to be the team car in Can-Am for the next 3 years, with Parsons scoring a surprise 4th at Mid-Ohio in 1972. The wreck sat for many years, and sadly Shearson died of cancer in 2004. Fern, Doug's widow, sold the remnants of the car and the rights to Lilo Zircron. Zircron and his team at Toluca Lake Historics painstakingly reconstructed the car and returned it to its original livery and glory. The group specializes in restoring and resurrecting iconic and famous race cars.
Lilo's secret location.
I was moving around a little bit out there the last time.
And if you think this race car is special, we'll stay tuned in the future to see some of our friend Lilo Zircron's little stable. Some mind-blowing machinery. We got UG7 out here today too, folks. Ran it earlier. We're gonna run it.
Being on the very steep learning curve in this car was not only about the massive power provided by the high-rise manifold with 48 IDA Webers, Chevrolet 383 cubic inch dry sump engine, but the dog-ring Hewland LG 500 4-speed gearbox. Those who are capable of driving a manual transmission still probably have not had the experience of going up and down through the gears without a synchronizer. With synchro engagement, not found here, there is a synchronizing mechanism assisting in equalizing gear speed. Optimizing gear selection and avoiding wear of the dog rings is done by making quick shifts. The locking mechanism for a gear consists of a collar on the shaft, which is able to slide sideways so that the gear teeth on the inner surface combine two circular rings with teeth on their outer circle. The circumference has one attached to the gear and one to the shaft hub. Generally, the way to drive this type of box is to power shift up through the gears, but many use the clutch for downshifting. For me, it was easier to clutch in the upshifts as instructed, but to rev match or blip the throttle without the clutch for downshifts.
Video work. Starting up this beast.
My crew chief, Craig, gave me some last-minute instructions as we flipped the power switches and hit the starter button. The crank of the starter whined as the monstrous 383 small block roared to life. Even helmeted, the concussion of the exhaust was loud and clear as I let my right foot rev the 670 horsepower motor. Pushing the shifter straight forward while depressing the clutch pedal, the crew gave the car a little nudge and into first gear the Hewland went. A thumbs up from Noah, and I gradually released the left pedal, slightly squeezed the throttle, and away I went up to the track. A quick nod and a wave from the safety crew at the top of the pit lane, and I was accelerating and shifting into second as I joined the circuit at the entrance to turn 1. Rolling my foot to add a bit of throttle and then release and clutch into third gear for the entrance to turn 2, a long carousel with a racing line in the middle of the road. I went through turns 5 and 6 accelerating, tapping the brakes and pushing the lever into third, then fourth down the back straight to turn 7. Puttering through 8 and getting a decent exit from 9, I accelerated up the main straight. After a moderate outlap and a decent entry apex into turn 9, it was time to truly feel the car. Down went my right foot on the exit and wow! An explosion of sound and speed up to 5,700 RPM and blam into fourth gear. The small steering wheel shook and resisted in my one hand, threatening to jump from my grip as I made the shift. I quickly got both hands on the wheel at the 9 and 3 o'clock position for the ride up the front straight. The car buffeted slightly from side to side, and the speed just kept coming, like a hawk diving for its prey. Downforce was notable as I came through the corners, and the giant bias ply tires held the road despite wanting to snap loose as I squeezed the throttle in each gear. Anyone who observed these cars on track described them as ground pounders. The experience in the seat is nothing like I had ever experienced before. The corners came up faster than any exploit I had ever had at Big Willow. It was effortless for the car, and more sensory input than the driver had handled before. Once safely back in the garage, I unstrapped and climbed from the car. All my anxiety was gone, and I felt left with a nearly post-coital bliss of having manhandled an absolute monster. The crew and I agreed that considering the technology in 1968, the guys who raced these cars in the period were men amongst men. As the echo of the motor still rang in my ears somewhere in eternity, I swear I heard Carl Haas with Chuck and Sherry Parsons and Skip Scott laugh with glee. If you like what you see, subscribe and hit the like button. Ring the bell too so we can let you know when new stories appear. We post about once a week.